Y'all, today we need to talk about a serious unforeseen consequence of the Shadow Spell revamp that just hit live servers. So if y'all don't know, the level 180 Darkmoor update is finally here. One of the big things that happened is that Shadow Spells are very different. Every major Shadow transformation has changed, the way Backlash is taken changed, and the thing that I wanted to talk about today, every single boss in the game that uses shadow magic has also had some of their spells replaced. And I think the way these spells have been replaced actually makes some really iconic battles super broken, as in they don't do what they used to do at all. I actually just wanted to show this firsthand before talking about why this is happening. We're gonna go into the galleries, which in my opinion is iconic, right? It is very well known for the Ghost Dog fight, which involves a very powerful overtime cheat, a very powerful combo that he does with Shrike. So this battle features a very powerful hit cheat that Ghost Dog just did, called the Poetry of War. And the way that overtime works is he has a cheat in 3 rounds where he detonates all of the remaining damage on that dot, meaning if you don't remove it, you're in a lot of trouble, especially if you're at the level that this battle is intended for. Now, the reason why this battle is so hard is because of Shadow Shrike, right? I have a lot of Shad rating because I'm on a max level, but a normal level 95 will have little to no Shadow rating. And basically what Ghost Dog will do when he gets that first Shad, his AI tells him to Shadow Strike. Now, what Shadow Strike used to be was 50% pierce and 10% damage instead of just the 45% outgoing that it is right now, and it was pierce, not damage. But the other thing that's very relevant is the way Backlash actually works. Now, in order to reduce Backlash from Shrike, you have to get rid of blades on self. Shrike isn't just gonna reduce Lash from you hitting. So the synergy that Ghost Dog used to have, where he would Shrike and have a hitting cheat that also was accompanied by a lot of other hits that he would naturally do, that synergy is no longer there. This battle is as simple as just letting the bosses Shrike do the damage themselves and not be as worried about a 50% pierced overtime that's gonna detonate on you. So he's about to use the new Shrike. He would have done this way earlier before, but as y'all can see, right, the way that this looks is obviously the new animation. He has like a blade pack and he gets a pip from the Shrike. So the old Shrike, the 50% one, that's gone. He can't just reduce it by hitting, which he's basically coded to do naturally, especially with the overtime cheat. And because there's a blade pack and Ghost Dog isn't really gonna blade spam, he is guaranteed to take the full 15% backlash from this new Shadow Shrike compared to taking basically 0% backlash from the old Shadow Shrike. So as y'all can see, right, he's literally hitting. Now this would have had 50% pierce. This would have been a lot better. Look at this. It's doing literally no damage. Yes, I'm a high level, but this should be doing a lot more. And very importantly, at no point is this reducing Lash the way that it used to, right? All the things that this battle had going for it in terms of synergy with the old Shrike, completely gone. They took a very awesome end of world boss and made it a much easier thing, right? Look at this. Another cheat that would have reduced Lash because it's an interrupt thing that actually detonates stuff. Also not reducing Lash because Shrike no longer does a hit for Lash type of thing. So as y'all can see, he doesn't have a blade on. The shadow creature behind him that is unhappy with him not doing the pact for the blade, it's obviously still unhappy. He does a whole feint, which before would have been a really cool move. Now it doesn't even reduce Lash. On his last round, if I'm correct, for not having any blades after Cravenly's done with this interrupt cheat, what we'll see is Ghost Dog, not only has he had much less damage output because he doesn't have Shrike that gives pierce, he's also just gonna take 15% Lash because at no point is this boss meant to blade like that, right? So it's a little bit of a weird situation. Now, y'all might have noticed that his health bar didn't go down until after the animation. That's just like, you know, a visual error, but hopefully the point is illustrated well, right? The craziest part about this Shadow Shrike change is that I'm assuming that this logic also affects a lot of fights like Shadow Sentinel and Shadow Seraph fights. Those also happen at the end of Chrysalis. This is also a screenshot from the Lorcan fight. It looks like Lorcan, which is a Shadow Sentinel using boss, also uses a new system, also ends up taking Lash because he doesn't actually naturally shield himself, which is the way the Shadow Sentinel reduces Lash. Another example of a boss that doesn't have the things in its toolkit anymore to even reduce Lash or use the shadow spells that it's given. It continues a problem that I think actually ruins a lot of fights, and this is just something that I've experienced a little bit recently, and that's the fact that though they do like kind of like dabble a little bit with fights and have Shadow Strike and other Shadow transformations, what you'll notice as you quest past Chrysalis is that a lot of them will use Shadow creatures. Now, all the Shadow creatures like Dark Nova, if y'all remember those were 2 Shadow pips, and if you do things that they liked, they would buff and increase in damage. All of those have also been removed from the player, right? Those aren't a thing anymore, but they do seem to still be in the game, as in like if you go into Polaris or if you go against Baba Yaga, you'll still see them using those. However, what all of those have in common is most of the time the bosses don't do things that the creature likes, so not only does the Shadow creature not end up being that threatening, the actual person that casts the Shadow creature also ends up taking a lot of lash. They've essentially taken the few fights where bosses use Shadow magic and naturally do not take lash, and made those into fights that also involve taking way too much lash as well. I think there's a very, very simple solution to all of this so that we don't lose out on all these iconic fights, right? The more changes we have, the more these things are going to retroactively affect parts of the game that a lot of people consider very, very well done, right? Like Chrysalis, for a lot of people, the battles and the actual, like, you know, the cinema type feeling, like you don't want to interfere with that by making all these battles all like, you know, crusty. And the best thing they could do is actually take an update to not only revisit all the battles that they changed with this update, but also revisit all of the bosses that currently just use Shadow creatures and end up doing half of the work for you. Right, the way the lore is, like, Shadow magic is deeply corrupting, right? It literally made this entire world subjugated. It threatened to tear apart the spiral, right? The whole point of that should be that it's actually like menacing when an enemy has Shadow magic. When you see the galleries and you see like Ghost Dog, you should be scared a little bit, right? Like Polaris mobs, like, you know, the Inspector at the beginning, Yaga, all of these things that use Shadow magic, they shouldn't just be taking backlash because they don't know how to use Shadow creatures either. I think all of that kind of cheapens how powerful the entire, you know, type of magic should be feeling, especially lore-wise. I'll say this, I think the big reason that this is going to affect a lot of the game is that there really is no way for a boss to smartly reduce lash anymore, if that makes sense, unless they have a cheat that complements it. Right, all of Backlash is really less about the behavior overall of a mob and more about just having cards on yourself. Right, if y'all don't know, the way all of these work, like Shrike, Ghost Dog took a bunch of lash because he didn't blade. If Shadow Sentinel, you want to use it and not take lash, you need to have shields on. These are all hanging effects, so unless the bosses become a lot smarter, they're never going to be able to use Shadow magic well ever again, and I think that's a deep loss for the game. So when they do revisit, I think either add a cheat for like a striking boss to always have blades on themselves, or at least sometimes have blades on themselves. Make it so that Shadow Sentinel bosses have a cheat that always tries to keep a shield on them, right? That would at least make the game a little bit more like, you know, like, oh, maybe I should do something about the pact so that they do take lash. Like, at least make it like that type of layered type of gameplay. So otherwise, everything's just going to become way less threatening. And I feel like a lot of people think that the game is already being watered down a lot. You don't want it to just become easier and easier, especially as an unforeseen consequence of a change that's really meant for high level. But I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on all the bosses that y'all think are going to be affected. Keep in mind, this is like only really the Shadow Seraph, Shadow Sentinel, and Shadow Shrike bosses. There are still Shadow creatures in the game from what I can tell. But what all of these fights have in common after the Shadow revamp is that they aren't really compatible with anything that they use, and they take more lash than the damage that they actually threaten. And with more fights doing that than before, I would call this update a net negative for parts of the game that a lot of people hold dear. Let me know how y'all would revamp the bosses with the new Shadow spells so that it doesn't feel like they interfered. It is worth mentioning that they did put in the patch notes that these fights they did revisit. I don't know what they mean by revisit. I'm assuming that they just don't like completely break. But for any fight that just slightly involves Shadow magic rather than only involving Shadow magic, it seems like they haven't really reworked anything. And in fact, it has made the fights a lot easier, a lot different to say the least. What other fights do y'all think are going to be affected? How would y'all fix this issue? And what are y'all's opinions about the Shadow magic revamp in general? I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts. I definitely wanted to talk about this because of how many fights this actually could affect, especially if they keep going in this direction. I look forward to reading all of y'all's thoughts in the comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave a sub if you're new. And as always, if somebody hasn't told you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome, y'all. See y'all soon. And yeah.